make a slow start now, and as people filter through, they'll be able to join as they want to. Just so everybody knows, we are recording this session. We will not be recording the breakout scenario that happens at the end because we want there to be open discussion for that. So, welcome everybody to our second month of learning event, Managing Neurodiverse Teams. Now, in this 90-minute session, we're going to have about an hour of learning content and then 30 minutes of interactive content. During this, we're going to talk to you about the business case for neurodiversity and what the UK law says employers need to be doing. We're going to talk about some barriers that neurodivergent people face with different aspects of the work environment, from the physical work environment to company culture to progression and things like that. We're going to talk about how cultural norms can create barriers to career progression. We're going to talk about the skills that managers and leaders need to bring to these kind of things, acknowledgement of the pressures that you're under, and talking about how we can make this work. A little bit about universal design principles and how those can apply to how you can create more neuro-inclusive cultures. And then we're going to have an interactive breakout scenario. I will talk to you more about how that will work when we get to it, but basically you'll all be in little breakout rooms virtually on here with a chance to walk through a scenario. Hopefully you've all received the documents that we sent you this morning. If not, please do check your inbox because you should have something in there. But when you're in the breakout rooms, you will all have permissions to share your screens. So if anybody in the room who did receive the slides wants to have those up on screen to help everyone else, really easy for you to do that. So before we get talking about the main reasons we're here, I always like to start with a bit of a quick terminology check-in. Now, many of you may already have attended GAIN events before, such as our Neurodiversity 101 workshop, so you may already be familiar with this, but we want to make sure there's shared understanding. As always, our aim here is not to be prescriptive with language. It's more about making sure that the conversation we're having makes sense to everybody because we all have the same core understanding of the words that we're using. And I want to talk about the words neurodivergent and neurotypical. Now, I'm autistic, I'm neurodivergent. Neurodivergent simply means when a person's brain processes, learns, or behaves differently from what's considered typical. So again, autistic like myself, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and so on and so forth. Neurotypical is the term that we use to describe an individual whose mind thinks, perceives, and behaves in ways that are considered the norm. Now, there's a lot of discussion within the neurodiversity community as to whether there's any such thing as a neurotypical person, because every single person on our planet has a unique balance of strengths and support needs, aspects of the way their minds work in unique ways. So there probably isn't a single person who could be considered fully neurotypical. It's more a useful shorthand for understanding the difference between a person who finds that they get along just fine with the world as it currently works and people who might face more challenges. And the third word is neurotype. That is just a shorthand term. It's a quicker way of saying a kind of mind. So ADHD is a neurotype, autism is another, dyslexia is another, again, so on and so forth. And of course, we have the term neurodiversity. Now, historically, in understanding of the different ways that minds work, looking at autism, looking at dyslexia, looking at dyspraxia, and so on and so forth, historically, these were treated as deficits and as problems to solve. The expectation was that a person who was not neurodivergent, a person who was neurotypical, was somebody whose mind was working correctly. And the assumption was everybody else needed to be helped to be more neurotypical. We no longer believe that. What we now understand is that actually, just as humans have natural variation in height, weight, skin color, physical abilities, that actually the range of variation of the way our minds work is also normal. Every single person on the planet has a unique set of skills and talents, a unique balance of needs and ways that they need things to be made easier for them or challenges they face. The difference is that society as it currently works is structured more to work better for certain kinds of minds than others. So some of us may find that we face challenges in the world just because of those differences. And what we're looking at now is ways that we can lower those barriers and create a world that is more equitable for everybody. It's also useful to think about how we talk about this in the world. You may have heard the terms before of person first and identity first language. In fact, you may have received guidance on whether to use person first or identity first language in how you have discussions about these things. In academic and medical communities, there tends to be advice to use person first language. So that would involve saying a person with autism or a person with disabilities. But actually, if you speak to actual neurodivergent people, people in the community, most of us prefer identity first language. That means saying an autistic person or a dyslexic person or an ADHDer or a disabled person. And there is a similar trend actually in the disability community as well. This is not universal, but we all have different ways of expressing that our minds are the way they are. And one of the reasons that the neurodivergent community often prefers identity first language is this isn't something tacked on to us. I didn't become neurodivergent one day, and this is a thing that I have now that I have been without before. There is no version of me that is a person without autism. Autism is integral to every aspect of how I experience the world, how I process information, how I put myself forward in the world. So I'm not a person with autism, I am autistic. But again, this isn't universal. Different people have their own preferences. What we generally recommend when you're having conversations about this is use a mixture of person first and identity first. We tend to lean more towards identity first. But if you're talking about a specific person and you know how they prefer to be referred, use that the same way you would for any other aspect of that person. It's just about being respectful. So I did say that one of the first things we would talk about is the business case for neurodiversity. There is also a very strong human case for why we need to think about neurodiversity in the workplace. But you may sometimes face resistance from people in the workplace saying, well, why does this matter? Why should we care about this? And we'd love it if those people would care about the human reason. But it can be useful to point out that actually, even if you're someone who doesn't care about that, it makes good business sense to be neuroinclusive. We know that not only the insurance industry, but the investment industry and other financial services industries are facing a lot of competition for top talent. Not only are we in industries ourselves where the best performers, the people who are best at the role, will be in demand from lots of different companies and therefore kind of have their pick and choice of where they want to go. We also have an overall aging workforce where knowledge is leaving faster than it can be replaced or transferred. And we also know that we're facing high competition outside of the industry. A lot of these skills and abilities that we need now for really mobile technical skills, for the really modern new kinds of work that's coming out, are things that people are in high demand across a wider range of industry, but even beyond our own. People who would never potentially have considered the insurance and investment and financial services industries as their career choice, which means that being able to become a workplace where people from a wide variety of backgrounds can thrive means that people who would never have felt able to go for roles in your industry before can now consider you, which gives you access to a wider range of people and more skills than you would have had before. We also know that from studies that have been done, such as JP Morgan Chase's Neurodiversity pilot, that actually when you create a neuroinclusive workplace and you think about how you can make the best of the neurodivergent people you have working for you, you actually unlock significant benefits. During JP Morgan Chase's Neurodiversity pilot, they found that within 6 months of the pilot, the autistic participants they had working for them were 48% faster and up to 92% more productive than their neurotypical peers. And there was a 99% retention rate of people who joined the pilot. They've since made that an ongoing neurodiversity program due to the success of it. And we also know that even just beyond the benefits of giving neurodivergent people like myself workplaces where we can thrive and kind of give you those amazing boosts from the skills and abilities that we have, The entire workforce benefits when you create workplaces where difference and diversity of thought is not only accepted but welcomed and encouraged. When you create that kind of working environment, inclusion and integration of people from different backgrounds boosts team morale, it boosts productivity, and it means that everyone feels like they can belong as the person they are and bring more of themselves to the workplace. There is also the legal side of things. Now, I'm showing you here the Equalities Act's definition of disability. Not all neurodivergent people individually identify as disabled. I do. I have many friends who are neurodivergent who don't consider themselves disabled. But regardless of how somebody personally identifies, if they are neurodivergent, they are still covered under the Equalities Act, under the section for disability. And that's because of the way the Equalities Act defines disability. The Act says someone cannot be discriminated against because they have a disability, are perceived as having a disability, or are connected to someone who has a disability. And the Act defines disability in a specific way. It means that somebody has an impairment, which the Act further defines as a difference or reduction in physical or mental abilities compared to most people, in which that impairment makes it harder for that person to do everyday activities, and where the effect is either long-term or likely to reoccur within a year. So the Act doesn't say, have you been diagnosed with a condition? The Act says, is there an aspect of yourself that is different to most people, that makes it harder to do everyday activities, that's not going anywhere anytime soon, in which case you're covered under the Act. And that can cover a variety of different things. And I mentioned there that it's not about diagnosis, and that's important. There has actually been a legal case, Bennett v. Metek. This case was not about neurodiversity, it was about cancer, but it's still relevant. In this particular legal case, there was a situation where an employee was awaiting diagnosis for cancer, but obviously their work was being affected by the cancer and by the medical situation going on, and they were let go from the work because of the impact it was having on things. And then the employer tried to get around the idea that, well, they didn't have a diagnosis yet. Now, you cannot make assumptions as to whether an employee has a disability based on whether they have a formal diagnosis. If your employee can demonstrate they have an impairment that meets the requirements of the Act, if they can satisfy that section of it, that is sufficient for them to be covered. I want to preface this, we are not lawyers. This is not formal legal advice for specific situations, but what we want to say is err on the side of being on the team with your colleagues. As managers and leaders and people at different levels of business, you probably already are thinking that way. You know, you work with your team every single day. You want to work well with them. You want them to thrive and succeed. You can do that without needing formal diagnosis and paperwork. If somebody is asking for an adjustment in the workplace, if they are asking for support, and you can reasonably make that happen for them, don't delay so that you can get documentation and evidence and hold off until you get that. Because if that ends up delaying things to the point where that person's work is impacted, that could become a problem for everybody involved. Now, that was all very formal and very dry. We want to cover that because it's important to understand this is important both as a human thing because we all matter, but also because there are implications here in the workplace. And it's a good idea to remember that actually there is a legal obligation here as well. That was all very dry, and I apologize for that. In a moment, I'm going to start talking more around the actual specifics around neurodiversity, around the challenges we face in the workplace and things that you can do to support your teams. But first, I want to get us all into a mindset of more of the human element of why this is important. And to do that, what I'd like you all to do is close your eyes. And for the next 15 to 20 seconds, you're going to try to visualize, you're going to try to see in your mind's eye a rotating red sphere. And I want you to really focus on this. Think about that color red. How bright is the color of the sphere that you're picturing in your mind? Is it really like a dull, deep burgundy red? Is it really bright and bold like a primary red? Is it quite a pale pastel shade? What does the surface of this sphere look like? Is it shiny and reflective, or is it more matte? Is there a texture? Is it smooth or rough? Is there a pattern to it? There might be multiple colors of red on there. And now think about the fact that it's a rotating red sphere. What direction are you rotating it in? How fast is it moving? Can you change it? Can you change the texture of the sphere while you're rotating it in your mind? Can you change the direction you're rotating in? How manipulable is it for you? Just a few more seconds, just visualizing that. And now I'd like you all to open your eyes and come back in. So on the screen, we have 10 images. And these represent rough approximations of different levels of visualization skill. I want you to imagine they are numbered from 1 to 10. Now, if you could literally see nothing, if when I talked about visualizing, nothing came in your head, that would be the number 0. If you could kind of see something very vague, but you couldn't get detail, that would be numbers, say, 1 to 4. If you could get something reasonably detailed, but you didn't have a huge amount of control or complexity of it, that's numbers 5, 6, 7. If you could see really high detail, if you could manipulate this, if you could change it and move it, that's numbers 8, 9, or 10. And what I'd like you all to do now is just post in chat a number between 0 and 10 that most closely matches roughly where your ability to visualize was in that particular scenario. And we're going to take a moment to see what kind of numbers come up. And we've got 6s, we've got 9s, we've got 10s. We've got numbers all over the place. I'm going to quickly pull up the chat box here to see more of them. Now, we have quite a few very high visualizers in this room, but I can see that we have a 0 as well, and that's really important. Visualization is a skill that exists on a spectrum like all other skills. When we talk about neurodiversity, this is an example of that in practice. Visualization exists on the spectrum, and actually both ends of visualization are a form of neurodivergence. People who have extremely vivid and detailed visualization skills have what's called hyperphantasia. People who do not visualize literally have what's called aphantasia. Now, some of you may be quite surprised to see that variation in that chat box there. Quite often we find that people who are one of the extreme ends of the scale often go their whole life assuming everyone else sees things the same way. I have many friends who are aphantasic who, until they realized that they were aphantasic, they thought that when people talked about imagining things that they were being metaphorical. And likewise, I know people for whom the idea that other people couldn't do that would have been quite surprising to them. Now, aphantasia doesn't mean someone isn't imaginative or creative. It just means that that person uses different approaches to imagining and creating ideas. But what it does impact is how a person learns, memorizes, and recalls information. People who can visualize may often depend on visual cues or visual tools to aid their memory, whereas people who are aphantasic may need to use different approaches for studying, for preparing information, for recalling and discussing events that happened in the past, and things like that. And imagine the kinds of skills and talents we would lose from the workplace if we assumed and built aspects of learning and study around expecting everyone to have perfect visual recall and things like that. This is an example of neurodiversity in practice that often goes under the radar, simply because we're lucky enough that while there are some areas where there is an assumption of a certain amount of visualization skill, it isn't as widespread as some other things, but it does impact how people approach seeing the world. As I'm talking about responsibilities and legal expectations and everything we covered before, I imagine there's some feelings of anxiety among those of you who may feel that this is a difficult balancing act for you to make. And I understand that. There's a lot of pressure when you're in a position where you are managing a team, where you are managing other colleagues, and you know that there are needs of the business, but there are needs of your colleagues who you care about and who you want to see succeed. The truth is that being neuroinclusive, especially if you follow universal design principles, which we will get into in this, actually will help you meet needs of business. Meeting the needs of your colleagues will increase your ability to really thrive as a team and as an organization. Because employees who feel safe to speak up and share ideas, in workplaces where difference is valued, bring more innovation to the workplace. Employees who aren't dealing with physical environments that are uncomfortable or challenging for them, or colleagues who don't make them feel like they belong. Employees who don't have those problems are going to be more productive because they'll be more focused. They won't be distracted by challenges and problems they're facing and worrying about things that really could be made easier for them. Employees who feel that they have a stake in creating the success of the workplace actively will take more ownership of helping you achieve it. And so actually, it's really useful to look at these things from a collaborative point of view. And that collaboration is something that we want to get into. Now, I'm not expecting you to read all of the words on all of these slides as I'm talking to you. There's a lot of content on here. The reason that is because we're going to give you a copy of these slides after the event. The hope is that you'll be able to then reread these as you want to dive more deeply into them, to explore the information and to come back to it as and when you want to. This slide, for example, on the left, what we have is a series of quotes from people who responded to one of the surveys we do. We do a lot of surveying and research at GAIN, and this survey was about disclosure and things like that. And what you might see on the left is a lot of people expressing having had negative experiences after they disclose their neurodivergence. So how you respond when someone discloses is one of those things that really can make the difference between how that conversation is going to go going forward and the experience of your employees. The first thing to remember is that when someone discloses their neurodivergence to you, what they are actually doing in that moment is showing trust in you. It's very likely that in the past they might have, in other workplaces, tried to talk to a manager about their needs and it could have gone really poorly. So the fact that they are willing to go and talk to you in the first place probably means a combination of they have an unmet need or a situation they need support with, and they want to tell you about it so that they can get you on side. And they trust you enough to feel that having that conversation would be productive. So they're actually already coming to you in a really positive way by having this conversation in the first place. This is an act of trust. It's also important to remember that just because someone comes to you and says, oh, I'm autistic, oh, I found out I've got ADHD, don't assume they're telling you bad news. For a lot of us, especially if we weren't diagnosed as children and we found out later in life, disclosure can come with a sense of relief, of excitement, of now I know, now I can find tools to help me. So follow the energy of the person disclosing it to you. Another important thing to remember is this is private personal information. It is sensitive information, just as you would not, if an employee disclosed to you that they were pregnant, immediately go and tell the rest of the team. You would respect the privacy of that and work on their timeline to bring it to the rest of the team for the good news, to HR to discuss their maternity leave and plans for cover in the interim. You wouldn't do all that the second they disclose it to you. You would have a conversation. You would say, congratulations, how can we help you? Do the exact same thing with any other kind of disclosure, including for neurodiversity. And remember, these are collaborative discussions. As I said, most of the time we find that disclosure happens at a point where it is necessary. Again, because of so many past negative experiences. In our own surveys, we found that 59% of people who had told their manager they were neurodivergent only did so after they'd passed probation or when circumstances meant that it was required, such as when they were in need of support or adjustments, or they were facing workplace challenges and they realized that they couldn't get those challenges resolved without talking about what was going on personally. So how you have that conversation, there's a couple of things that we like to recommend. And the first is our 3 A's, which is ask, accept, and avoid. Ask them about the nature of the challenges being experienced. Obviously, listen to how the person describes it to you, but don't just go with what do you need. Say, okay, how is this affecting you? With myself, for example, when I told a manager at a previous role that I was autistic, the reason I was talking about that is because I have sensory issues with light and sound and movement. I'm very sensory avoidant to those things. I can find them very overwhelming. And in an open plan office, I was having a challenge of not being able to focus because of that. So ask about why this person is giving you this information so that you can understand what kinds of support they might be looking for. The second A is accept. Accept the truth that you are being told by this person. Again, this comes into the diagnosis versus self-identity. Regardless of whether somebody has the paperwork yet, if they are experiencing a challenge and they want some support with that, that's valid. You don't need to question it. Listen to what they're telling you. And the third one is avoid. Now, this one sounds quite negative. HR and occupational health are vital tools for ensuring that support is robust, it is well reasoned, that it is given consistently to a person, that it is maintained throughout their career, and they don't have to kind of re-up it every single time there's a change in their workplace, like a new manager coming in. But it can be scary for us. It can feel very formal to get HR involved or to get occupational health involved. So when somebody first discloses to you and asks for adjustments, don't stop the conversation and make that the first thing you bring in. Listen first and then think, are the things they're asking for things that I need approval up the chain for? Or are they things I can approve myself? If you can approve them yourself, be open to having an informal agreement to try things out and then say, if we need more support, I'm happy to go with you to HR and to support you through this. But make sure that it's collaborative with the employee. Make sure that it's something that you're doing alongside them. And the other thing we talk about is the 3 E's. Those are empower, experiment, and endorse. So on the empower one, I said, think about whether you need formal documentation and approval up the chain in order for you to approve an adjustment. At the same time, think about whether this is something that you need to approve at all. When I disclosed to my manager at an old workplace that I was autistic and I talked about my sensory needs, my manager said, okay, well, what support do you need? And I said, well, to be honest, the main thing is just when I'm at my desk in the open plan office, if I can just have my headphones on and have some background music blocking out the ambient noise, that will cut out a lot of the challenges I'm having. And my manager's response is, well, you don't need to ask my permission for that. You can just do that whenever you want, so long as I can ask you a question when I need to. And I said, well, that's why I was asking for your support there, because some people do push back. And so that was why I wanted that support. But you might find that some of the things your employees need are things that you don't need to specifically approve. You can just say to them, you're an adult, I trust you. I've seen how you work hard in the department. If you need to make some small changes to the way you work, you can just do that and just tell me what you're doing so that I can support you if you get any pushback from anybody else. Also, remember, this is an experiment. It's likely that for many employees who disclose to you, they may not have had productive conversations about this with past employers. They might not be used to actually getting to test out the adjustments they want to try. So some of it will be theory. So be willing to say to someone, okay, you've asked for the permission to book out these private meeting rooms or focus spaces throughout the workday so that you're not sitting at your main desk when it's busy. Let's give that a try. We'll give it a try for a couple of months and see if it helps you or not, see if it impacts you positively or negatively in other ways, and then we'll have a conversation and have a catch up in a couple of months and see if that's working or if we need to tweak it. It doesn't need to be perfect on day one. And some adjustments you try might make things more difficult for that person. They won't know until they try them. So don't treat this as we tried an adjustment, it didn't work, we're not adjusting. Say, we tried an adjustment, it didn't work, so what do we change about this to make it work? And keep this collaborative over time. And the finally is endorse. As I said, other people, depending on the nature of how this goes, might not respond well. You might have people who refer to a colleague who's doing things differently as getting special treatment. You might see some people saying, oh, well, this person didn't seem neurodivergent before, why do they need this help? And the answer is, well, they were masking, they were hiding the challenges they were facing and dealing with them unsupported, and now we're changing that. As the manager, you set the tone for what is normal in your team, for what is acceptable in your team. So if you say, no, I'm absolutely fine with that colleague doing this particular thing that they're doing differently. It makes perfect sense. They're working well with it. They have my permission. Actually, all of you should be coming to me if you need support. That's how we want to work. This is normal. This is not a problem. If you can be the person who advocates in that way and endorses, you can head off a lot of potential challenges or anxieties your employees might have about how others will perceive them. And that leads to another thing is, as leaders of people in the organization, you have a phenomenal amount of power to create, influence, and inform the culture of that workplace. For many employees, the primary way they experience the culture of the workplace isn't through whatever's formally documented on the employee manual or things like that. It's how their team operates and how their manager operates, which means you have a phenomenal ability to decide what the culture of your team is going to be and create it through your own action. And some of the easiest ways you can do that is by advocating for your own needs in a way that informs the others that this is a normal thing to do. I've put some examples on screen, but again, something as simple as saying to the rest of your team, we have a lot of virtual calls. Now that we're all working all over the place, we're often on camera in these meetings. I find that really exhausting sometimes. Sometimes I need to be off camera, even if I'm in a meeting. I'm going to be doing that for this meeting, although I will turn my camera on when I'm speaking, just so that you can see my mouth move in case anybody needs that to understand what's being said better. But if anybody else is feeling exhausted like I am, feel free to do the same thing I'm doing. By saying that you have a need and telling your team how you're going to address that need and informing them they can do the same, you are not only saying that, you are also saying this is a normal conversation to have. Second. Excuse me, I had to cough. A lot of talking. You are saying this is a normal conversation to have. You are saying it's normal to express your needs in the workplace. You are saying it is acceptable to say that you need a support, that we empower each other and we accept that we are able to make independent decisions about how we're going to meet that. And it is normal for all of us to accept each other's needs and make space for that. Immediately, you create a workplace culture that says they can do the same thing. And that is very powerful. And it means you can do that before your employees have to start taking the risk of disclosing. You can make it safer for them to do that in the first place by making these kind of self-advocacy examples. I'm going to pause for a second before I go on to the next bit to give people a chance to ask a question or two if they want to, or to just breathe and process what they've heard so far. I'm going to talk a bit next about universal design principles, and then I'll go through some specific examples of different kinds of workplace challenges. Before I do, does anyone have any questions? If you do, please feel to raise your hand or post something in the chat. I'll give it just a moment. I can see somebody asked a question earlier about the slides. Yes, absolutely. I will be sharing these slides around with you all afterwards so that you will be able to see those. Sorry. So, take a moment to process. There's a lot of information in this. I know this is a really intense workshop with the amount of information you're being given. So let's just go through this slowly. Next, we're going to talk about universal design principles. The truth is that our world, by default, is designed to fit an imagined average person. Think about things like automatic door sensors that only measure above a minimum height. Now, the reason they do that is to stop children from leaving shops and buildings without adults, to stop animals from wandering in and out. But anybody who is below that minimum height then gets impacted by this and can have difficulty getting out of buildings where those are the only kind of doors available. And that can be a really frustrating situation. Think as well about when you go to the supermarket, the way the shelves are placed. I imagine everybody here has challenges with either the shelves on the top or the shelves on the bottom. And if something you're looking for is only on one of those, you might struggle. Think about somebody who has some mobility conditions that might restrict their ability to do that, might also have challenges. Think about something as simple as high streets that no longer have large amounts of public seating on them. Now, for some people, walking across that high street to go to various different shops might be no problem. But for others, finding that you now have to walk a longer distance without access to a place to sit and rest could cause challenges for that person. We build the world around an assumed average, But actually, the average person does not exist. There's a book called The End of Average by Todd Rose. I'm not going to go into detail about the book. I will info dump about it if I let myself. But I will simply say one of the things that book talks about is during, I believe it was World War One, when the first fighter airplanes were being developed. They took thousands of measurements of lots of different parts of the body of hundreds of pilots to try to create the perfect cockpit. And what they found is that went really badly because the perfect cockpit, actually, when they checked, it was built around an average range of those particular measurements. And when they looked at it, they realized that not a single one of their pilots fit all within the average range of all of those measurements. Not a single out of thousands. They tried measuring even more people, and the exact same problem persisted. They still did not have a single average person. And that's why now cockpits are extremely adjustable. Every single part of them can change the shape of, how it fits in your face, how your seat fits, the seat back, all those levels, how long this is. Even little things like thumb length were impacting on things. So that's the difference between designing for average and designing with universal design principles. Universal design is about trying to create flexibility, trying to create accessibility by trying to make something as accessible to as many people as possible. And when you do that, you can end up with something called the cut curb effect. So cut curbs were initially designed to make pavements easier for wheelchair users specifically by providing a ramp between pavement and road. But actually, almost everyone benefits from the fact that cut curbs exist. Yes, people who use wheelchairs find them easier, but if you are a parent pushing children in a buggy or just walking with a very small child holding your hand who might find the step up a bit harder, those ramps and those cut curbs make it easier. If you use a walker or a cane or a different kind of mobility aid. For visually impaired people, cut curbs have those bumpy paving slabs to provide a sensory cue and also ensure that when the person is getting on and off, they don't have to guess or check the height of the particular curb. They can go up a ramp where they don't have to worry about tripping. People who are pushing trolleys, people who are carrying large bulky items and just can't see under themselves very well as they're moving. That's the cut curb effect. It's when you create an adjustment or an increase in flexibility to help one group, and it helps even more people than you ever imagined. And it's something that you can do with how you approach the workplace as well. Now, let's talk about the office environment. Again, you don't have to memorize all of this. You're going to have all these slides to read from afterwards, but I want to just give you some examples of ways the office environment can be a challenge for neurodivergent people. The first thing is just getting to the office in the first place. I don't know if anybody here actually enjoys rush hour London commutes, but imagine what those are like if you get sensory overwhelm due to noise and sound and movement, if you have difficulty with wayfinding or making through paths and the train you normally get has been delayed or cancelled, you have to find a different route. If you are somebody who struggles with unpredictable social situations and you've got all these unpredictable people moving around, if you're someone who struggles with an instinctive understanding of how much time has passed or how long it takes to do things, and you might have a commute with changes, you might have 2 or 3 trains you have to get. Think as well about the physical environment once you're in the office. Hot desk pre-booking creates a lot of uncertainty for people. Open plan offices are very noisy environments. There will be a default lighting and temperature situation. I know almost every single office I've worked in, I've seen men walking around complaining that they're too hot, and half of the women walking around with big jumpers on and blankets because they find the environment too cold, because a single default temperature doesn't suit everybody correctly. Think about the fact that in the workplace, there is a continuous low level of social interaction. Even if you're sat at your desk focusing on something, people are seeing you, people are aware of you. There will be constant little moments of, hi, how are you doing? Which means that those of us who are high masking will be masking continuously throughout the workday. Thinking about your focus time getting interrupted by colleagues asking questions, expectations of there being social time during breaks, which means that you still don't get to actually demask and recover a little bit before going back to focus time. All of these things can have an impact on someone's experience in the workplace, and for those of us who are neurodivergent, can create additional challenges. At the same time, working hybrid isn't always a solution. For one thing, some people do prefer to work in the office. There's something called body doubling, which many people who are ADHDers tend to find quite useful, which is where having other people around you who are also focusing on a piece of work helps you maintain focus. So having them around is a really useful cue. Some people really thrive from a lot of social interaction and find it much easier to work when they have other people around them. My partner, who is autistic and has ADHD, is someone like that. He really struggles in when he's doing work and he's working solo all day. He prefers to have someone around, even if they're just having conversation while he's working. For me, that's my idea of hell in the workplace. I want my headphones on. I want no one talking to me. We're both neurodivergent and we both have equally valid needs there. Consider the fact that with hybrid working, a lot of offices have downsized or undergone refits, which means they no longer have enough desk capacity for the full team. In a hybrid model, if you haven't thought about that and thought about how to stagger those schedules, how to ensure that employees have access, that can also create more challenges and more unpredictability. So whatever kind of office situation you have, whether it's all office working, all remote, or all hybrid, you need to think carefully around how you make that work for the people around you. And there are a few ways you can do that. Here are a few very simple ways to use universal design principles to adjust the workplace. Instead of having a very standard 9 to 5 or semi-flexible working hours, if you allow flexible hours for the workplace, and granted, there can be limitations to this if you need to be able to pick up the phone to talk to other people or if there are standing meetings, but if you allow more flexibility, then employees who do have to come to the office can avoid the rush hour commute, can stagger their commutes, can work during the hours where they feel most productive. I need to cough again, one moment. Challenges of speaking for this long, sometimes I get a very dry throat. Again, if you are working hybrid and you've got a hot desking situation in the environment, consider looking at ways you can change the hot desking situation. Can you make desks pre-bookable? Can you set up a situation where employees who are very frequent office visitors, those who are in the office more than they're out of the office, can they have an assigned desk or at least have a long-term pre-booking of a desk that works well for them? If you have employees who really struggle with unpredictability, can you create specific zones they can assign their desks from? When it comes to office refits and looking at the design of the office, a lot of standard office refits tend to be very bright white office layouts with grid layouts, echoey sound, top-down lighting. If you're having a refit, take the opportunity to look at ways you can make a less overwhelming environment. Warm, lower light, compact and enclosed areas, using the way you put areas together to create buffers of sound and visual noise to create more of a sense of privacy in different spaces. It lets people demask a little bit and focus more on the work and feel less exposed. And make sure that if you are creating focus spaces or well-being rooms, they're not in the same section all your group meeting rooms are. I've worked in offices where that's the case because they went, oh, this is the floor, we have lots of extra rooms. We'll put the well-being room there and it's right next to a 30-person conference room. That well-being room is going to frequently be noisy because of ambient noise from the areas around. So think carefully about where you're putting those and how you're doing them. Another thing we can talk about challenges in the workplace is about cultural norms. A lot of workplace culture is invisible, which means that it's not something people have consciously decided to make part of how they work. It's kind of organically happened by itself. That can involve things like the social culture expecting people to be going to the pub after work, social lunches, working lunches, water cooler small talk and things like that. And all of that, if you are somebody who masks heavily and who therefore can get exhausted from a lot of social interaction, having zero time during the entire workday where you have a guaranteed break from that can make it harder for that person to focus fully throughout the entire day or throughout the entire week. It's going to increase the rate of burnout over time for them. Likewise, think about how you do your meetings. Some companies, there's a lot of 9 a.m. quickfire sessions, last minute meetings, meetings without agendas, AOB that's allowed to overrun for ages, lots of back-to-back meetings and things like that, which can be a really high pressure environment that does not need to be. Think as well about communication culture. How informative are emails? Have you ever received an email from someone where the subject line was "see me," and then the content was "I need to talk to you about something. Are you available?" And the immediate feel of panic in your mind because you have no idea what that's about, no idea what the context is, and no ability to prepare. Now imagine if that same email instead had the subject line that said, Johnson's report due tomorrow, check in. And then the email body explained, I want to make sure I've got the right information for this. Can I check these parts of it for you? I'm free this time today if you are. Suddenly, much less anxiety, you can prepare, you know what to expect. And again, here we've put some things here and here about how you can adjust meeting culture. I'm not going to read these all out because I want to make sure that we have time to go through other things. But if you are in a workplace where meetings can often be quite stressful, have a look at some of these afterwards and think about whether you could change the way that you structure meetings and the way that you handle them in the workplace. Simple things like making sure that, unless by exception, meetings are scheduled in advance, people know when they're coming up. Think about if you have a standing daily meeting that happens at the same time every day, maybe put in a set agenda and communicate in advance. We're always going to cover this. This is always how it's going to be formulated. If you are communicating agendas for meetings, don't just say we're covering this topic and that topic. Put in there what the goals are. You know, we need to talk about this KPI. The goal is we need to strategize how we're going to clear the backlog. We need an agreed set of actions and someone who's going to take ownership. People know what to expect. They can prepare accordingly. And again, here's a list of ways you can adjust social culture, thinking about things like just varying the ways that you do the social culture at the workplace so that people who have different social needs or preferences can enjoy them. Don't always default to the pub. There might be colleagues for whom that is the worst social environment. Still do that sometimes, but look at other things you can do sometimes as well. Let colleagues opt in or opt out without judgment and accept that some people might really like their colleagues, but just need a lunchtime where they're not socializing for once. Another thing that can be more difficult to talk about is how to be neuroinclusive when it comes to career progression. Now, we have surveyed neurodivergent and neurotypical people in a survey in spring and summer 2024, and we are currently working on a larger survey to try to build out a neurodivergent salary gap report. What we do know is that in the surveys we've run so far, salaries were higher for neurotypical people than neurodivergent people. And there was also evidence of an intersectional gap there with gender and neurodiversity. We also saw that neurodivergent people were less likely to be promoted than neurotypical people and face disciplinaries more often. Now, the crucial thing there is when we looked into why, what we found is that very frequently people's neurodivergent traits were being marked as performance issues. So people were experiencing less career progression, not because they weren't as good at the job, but because aspects of who they were as a person were being treated like things that had to be performance managed. So how do we look at things like this? Well, one thing I often talk about is that neurodivergent people, we are what you call the canary in the coal mine. The things that impacted us in the workplace are the same things that cause challenges for every single one of your employees. We might just show the pressure and the damage sooner than others. So when you think about how you can improve your performance measures and your progression metrics and how you do those kind of things, what you will actually do is create a more equitable environment for all of your employees by addressing these challenges. So think about, for example, when you're looking at performance measures, Do you have daily performance goals, and people who perform really well one day but really low the other will be performance managed? Maybe look at how that person's mind is structured. Some people, for example, people who have ADHD, have kind of cyclic levels of productivity. I know people who, on a high productive day, their performance, if you measured it on a sliding scale, would be 400% productivity compared to the average person. But then the next day, they'd be 20%. And the day after that, they'd be 30%. The day after that, they'd be 70%. Then the day after that, they'd be 300%. If you were to average out that person's performance over a month or a quarter, they would be the most productive member of the team. But if you judge them on weekly or daily, you'll probably end up putting them on a PIP for their low performance days with a target to get more consistency. And what you'll end up getting is overall lower productivity from somebody who feels like they're failing at their role. That's one very small example of a thing you can do, is just looking at how you're making these measures and thinking about how you can measure them in a way that gives everybody the chance to showcase their abilities. And let's be honest, even if someone doesn't have ADHD, everybody has days where they've got things going on that make them less productive. So long as overall they're getting all of their work done, they're meeting their goals, and things are being done on time or ahead of schedule, does the odd day where their productivity is lower really need to be something that gets managed? I could go along all of these different points that we have on this slide for ages, but I want to get to other things. So again, read these slides afterwards and think about the different ways that you can approach your team and your colleagues and how you manage their productivity. And what we have here is some specific examples of ways that you can do that as well. So these are hopefully going to be useful resources for you to have afterwards. We'll be sending you other things as well, like some little infographics you can use for other aspects of the workplace. So we're going to leave you with a lot of tools and resources you can play with after this. It'll all come to you by email. What we're going to do for the rest of this session is we're going to go through an empathy mapping and design thinking process. Now, many of you may already have used design thinking in business areas, because businesses do use this to help think about the client experience, about product design, about workplace experience, about all kinds of things like that. Some of you may already be familiar with it, but I want to make sure that those of you who are not are guided through this, because when you're in the breakout rooms, I'm not going to be in there with you. We've got 3 different breakout rooms, so you'll be randomly assigned to one with a group of other people. What this is essentially is a step-by-step structured way of thinking from a person-centered perspective about individuals in the workplace and about what their needs are, to help you come up with ideas of how you would approach different scenarios. Under a full design thinking situation, we would be going through all 6 of these steps, but we would want much more time to do that. So we're going to do a very shortened version. I need to cough again. 1 second. So we're going to empathize, define, and ideate. With empathize, that's where we think about and understand a specific person that we've imagined that we want to problem solve for. We think about who that person is, what their experiences are, what their needs are. And then we define. Let's define a problem that person faces. Let's think about how that impacts them in the workplace. And then we ideate. And this is blue sky thinking. This is open, free thought. What kind of things could we do to help this individual in the workplace? How could we structure things for them as a person? How could we structure things from a universal design perspective that would help everyone and also help them? And the way this is going to work is we've got scenarios to give you for this. So we have 5 personas that we have pre-made for you, simply because normally in a design thinking scenario, you would spend the first 20 minutes designing the persona. And we want to get straight to the ideation thing as quickly as we can. So we've given you some pre-made ones. It's important to remember that nobody is just one thing. Every single person is a complex whole being with a huge set of personal experiences related to everything from race, social background, gender, disabilities, age and things like that that make for a more complex personal experience. It's about intersectionality, so thinking about how people's whole self integrates fully into who they are and the experiences they have. Now, you're going to be split into groups and you will be given time to work through the personas. I'll give you about 3 minutes to pick a persona out of the 5 on the slides. After that, you can then spend 5 minutes working through the next step, which is where you will basically, having picked one of these, and you can see there we've got their name, their age, their neurotype, and some more details to go through. The next thing will be talking about their motivations and their goals, their pains and their gains. Think about who that person is and how they're described. What about the environment and culture would work well for this person? What does a good day look like for them? What kind of frustrations and struggles might they have in the workplace? What kind of things might make them feel like they don't belong? After 5 minutes of that, I will send a notification through to the group for you to change to the next discussion. And the next one after that will be their says, does, thinks, feels. It's another quick 5 minutes where you're going to pick one of those pain points, one of the challenges that you've thought about this person facing. What do you think they might be comfortable saying out loud when they're talking about the challenges they're facing in the workplace? What versus what they might be thinking but not saying? Because people don't always say what's really going on. Think about the kind of behavior you might observe that you might not have been told the cause of, how this might impact how they act in the workplace, and think about what feelings might be really going on under the surface. Use that to generate an insight statement, a key realization of what this all adds up to. And then the final bit will be a call to action, which is where you talk about how you could help that person with that challenge, whether it's about a universal design approach, whether it's about personal changes for their own needs, whether you're thinking, oh, I don't think this person will feel safe to disclose, so what can I do to create an environment where they don't need to, because we're already looking at how we can help them. Now, I can see we've had a few people drop off, so what I'm going to quickly do, I am actually going to amend the number of rooms because I want to make sure that we have enough people in each room to have a proper discussion. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to assign people to specific rooms, and then we're going to open this up. And here we go, assigning people across. There we go. You will all be automatically moved to different rooms to have discussions. I will not be in them. You should all have copies of these slides for the personas, and I will put notes in to lead you through each stage to remind you what you need to be doing next. So I'm going to go away for a second, and I will now open the rooms. You will automatically start filtering in.